It wasn't an accident. The cameras weren't checked yet, but a little girl already knew who tried to kill the millionaire. Emma walked home the long way that evening, her small sneakers tapping softly against the pavement as the sky slowly darkened above her. She liked this route because it felt quieter, safer somehow, even though it added 10 extra minutes to her walk. Her blonde hair was tied loosely behind her head, and the blue dress her mother had ironed that morning fluttered slightly in the cool air. Music played softly in her headphones, but not loud enough to block out the world completely. Emma had learned to listen, really listen, even when she didn't know why. The street was almost empty, the kind of emptiness that made every sound sharper and more noticeable. A distant engine, the hum of streetlights, the faint echo of footsteps somewhere behind her. She was just passing the intersection when it happened. The sound came suddenly, violently, tearing through the calm like a scream. Tires screeched, metal slammed into metal, and the force of it made Emma flinch so hard that her headphones slipped halfway off her ears. For a split second, everything froze, and then silence followed, heavy and unnatural. Emma's heart began to race. She stood still, holding her breath, her instincts screaming that something was very wrong. Slowly, she took off her headphones and turned toward the sound. Smoke drifted lazily across the street ahead, and a black car sat twisted near the curb, its front end crushed as if it had collided with something invisible. Before she even realized she was moving, Emma started running. As she got closer, she noticed the shattered glass scattered across the asphalt, reflecting the streetlights like broken stars. One of the headlights flickered weakly, casting uneven shadows. Then she saw him. A man lay near the open driver's door, half on the pavement, half against the car. His expensive coat was torn, his brown hair darkened with blood, and his blue eyes were open but unfocused, staring at nothing in particular. His chest rose unevenly, each breath shallow and strained. Emma stopped a few steps away, fear gripping her so tightly she felt dizzy. She had never seen someone hurt like this before, never been this close to something so real and frightening. For a moment, she wanted to turn around and run, to pretend she hadn't seen anything at all. But then she remembered something else. Just seconds before the crash, she had noticed another car. A gray one. It had rushed through the intersection too fast, swerved sharply, and disappeared down the side street without slowing down. At the time, it hadn't meant much. Now it meant everything. Emma swallowed hard and took another step closer to the injured man. Her hands were shaking as she pulled her phone from her pocket, nearly dropping it twice before managing to unlock the screen. She knelt beside him, her knees scraping against the pavement, and leaned in just enough to hear him breathing. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely steady. "Please don't stop." As she dialed the emergency number, Emma looked back toward the road, toward the direction the gray car had gone. The image of it burned clearly in her mind, sharper than her fear, sharper than the sound of the crash itself. Standing there beside the broken car and the wounded man, Emma understood something with quiet certainty. This wasn't an accident. And somehow, she was the only one who knew it. The operator's voice on the phone sounded calm and distant, a steady anchor in the chaos that had suddenly swallowed the street. Emma answered the questions as best she could, her small voice trembling as she described where she was, what had happened, and how badly the man was hurt. She kept her eyes on him the entire time, afraid that if she looked away for even a second, something irreversible might happen. The man groaned again, his head shifting slightly against the car door. It was a weak sound, but to Emma it felt like a sign, proof that he was still there with her. She leaned closer, careful not to touch him where the blood was darkest. "You're going to be okay," she said quietly, though she wasn't sure if she was saying it for him or for herself. The operator instructed her to check his breathing and stay with him until help arrived. Emma placed her hand near his chest, feeling the shallow rise and fall, uneven and frighteningly slow. She counted each breath in her head, afraid that if she stopped counting, she might miss the moment when he stopped altogether. The street began to change around them. Doors opened. Windows lit up. Someone shouted from across the road asking what had happened. A car slowed, then another, drivers craning their necks as they passed. Still, no one had come close yet, as if the scene itself warned them to keep their distance. Emma finally looked up when footsteps approached. A man and a woman hurried toward them, their faces tight with concern. The woman gasped when she saw the injured driver. "Oh my God," she whispered. "What happened?" Emma pointed down the road, her arm stiff. "Another car hit him," she said. "It didn't stop." The man pulled out his phone, speaking quickly to someone, likely the police. He asked Emma if she had seen anything else, if she knew what kind of car it was. Emma nodded, her heart pounding harder as she spoke. "It was gray," she said. "It went that way. Really fast." The adults exchanged a look, the kind that said they weren't sure whether to trust a child's memory in the middle of a shock. Emma noticed it immediately. The doubt. The hesitation. It made her grip her phone tighter. "I saw it," she insisted. "I'm not guessing." Sirens appeared in the distance, faint at first, then growing louder, their sound cutting through the murmurs of the small crowd that had begun to gather. Red and blue lights reflected off the broken glass, turning the street into something unreal. The ambulance arrived first. Paramedics jumped out, moving quickly, kneeling beside the man, checking his pulse, his breathing, speaking to him loudly. Emma stepped back only when one of them gently guided her aside. "You did the right thing," the paramedic said without looking away from his work. "You probably saved his life." The words hit Emma harder than she expected. She stood frozen, watching as they lifted the man onto a stretcher, secured him, and rushed him into the ambulance. For a brief moment, his blue eyes met hers. They were unfocused, confused, but there was something else there too. Gratitude, maybe. Or fear. Then the doors closed, and the ambulance sped away. The police arrived shortly after, asking questions, taking statements. Emma repeated what she had seen, every detail she could remember. The gray car. The direction it went. The speed. She spoke carefully, knowing that every word mattered. An officer crouched in front of her, his voice gentler than the others. "Are you sure it wasn't just an accident?" he asked. Emma met his eyes, her own steady despite the tremble in her hands. "I'm sure," she said. "It was on purpose." The officer didn't argue, but his expression told her he wasn't convinced. Not yet. As Emma walked home later with her mother, her body finally began to shake, the adrenaline draining away and leaving exhaustion behind. The street looked ordinary again, as if nothing had happened. But Emma knew better. Something had changed. And she had a feeling the hardest part was still ahead. The next day felt unreal, as if the night of the crash had slipped into a strange parallel world that only Emma could still see clearly. Morning sunlight filled the kitchen, warm and ordinary, but Emma barely touched her breakfast. Her mother moved around quietly, glancing at her daughter with concern, unsure how to begin a conversation that neither of them fully understood yet. At school, everything continued as usual. The bell rang, children laughed in the hallways, teachers wrote on the board. Emma sat at her desk, staring at the page in front of her without seeing it. Every loud sound made her flinch. Every passing car outside the window pulled her attention away. She kept replaying the moment of the crash in her mind, not the sound or the fear, but the gray car disappearing into the darkness. During recess, her teacher pulled her aside gently and asked if she was feeling all right. Emma nodded automatically. It was easier than trying to explain something that adults seemed determined not to fully believe. She had already learned that saying the truth once did not mean it would be accepted. That afternoon, news spread quickly. The injured man was identified as Daniel Hayes, a well-known millionaire and owner of a powerful investment firm. His condition was serious but stable. Reporters spoke about a tragic accident, about dangerous roads and late-night driving. No one mentioned another car. No one mentioned the hit and run. Emma watched the news with her mother that evening, her hands folded tightly in her lap. When the reporter repeated the word accident, something twisted painfully in her chest. "It wasn't an accident," Emma said quietly. Her mother sighed, rubbing her temples. "Emma, sweetheart, I know you're upset," she replied. "But things like this are complicated. The police will figure it out." "They won't if they don't look," Emma insisted. "They haven't even checked the cameras yet." Her mother turned to her then, really looking at her for the first time since the crash. "You don't know that," she said, though her voice lacked conviction. "I do," Emma replied. "The officer said so." Silence settled between them, heavy and uncomfortable. Emma's mother looked torn, caught between wanting to protect her daughter and wanting to believe that the world worked the way it was supposed to. That night, Emma lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the injured man's face and the direction the gray car had taken. She repeated the partial license plate in her head like a secret code, afraid that if she forgot even one detail, the truth would disappear with it. She realized something then that made her chest feel tight and cold. Adults wanted things to be simple. Accidents were easier to accept than crimes. Blame was easier when it didn't require effort. But Emma knew what she had seen. And if she didn't keep saying it, if she let herself be quiet because it was easier, then the man who drove away would never be found. Somewhere in a hospital room, Daniel Hayes was fighting to recover. Somewhere else, the person who hurt him was living as if nothing had happened. Emma turned onto her side, clutching her blanket tightly. She promised herself that she would not let the truth fade. Even if she had to say it again. The police station felt colder than Emma expected, not because of the air, but because of the way everything inside it seemed to slow her down. The walls were a dull gray, the chairs hard and uncomfortable, and the voices around her sounded muted, as if the building itself absorbed urgency and doubtlessly preferred routine. Emma sat beside her mother, her feet not quite touching the floor, swinging slightly as she tried to calm the nervous energy buzzing through her body. They had come on their own. No one had called them back. No one had asked Emma for more details after that night. That silence scared her more than the crash itself. An officer finally approached them, clipboard in hand, polite but distracted. He asked Emma to repeat what she had seen. She did, carefully, slowly, describing the gray car, the way it had cut in two sharply, the moment it forced the black car off the road. She described the direction it fled, the speed, the partial license plate she had memorized over and over until it felt carved into her mind. The officer nodded, writing things down, but his expression never changed. "So you didn't actually see the impact," he said eventually. "You saw it right before and right after." Emma frowned. "I saw enough," she replied. "It didn't stop. It didn't even slow down." "That doesn't necessarily mean intent," the officer said gently. "Drivers panic." Emma's fingers curled into her sleeve. "Or they know what they're doing." Her mother placed a hand on her knee, a quiet warning not to argue, but Emma couldn't stop now. She leaned forward slightly, her voice steady despite the fear twisting inside her chest. "If it was an accident," she said, "why did it leave so fast?" The officer paused, his pen hovering over the paper. For a brief moment, doubt flickered across his face. Then it vanished, replaced by professionalism. "We'll look into it," he said, the same words Emma had already heard too many times. As they stood to leave, Emma noticed a bulletin board near the exit covered with photographs and notes. Some cases were marked solved. Others weren't. She wondered how many truths were pinned there, waiting for someone to care enough to keep asking. Outside, the city moved on as if nothing had happened. Cars passed, people hurried by, and somewhere nearby a siren wailed without meaning. Emma felt small again, painfully small, like her words weighed less simply because they came from her. On the way home, her mother finally spoke. "I'm proud of you for trying," she said softly. "But sometimes you have to let adults handle things." Emma stared out the window. "What if the adults are wrong?" she asked. Her mother didn't answer. That night, Emma sat at her desk and drew the intersection from memory, marking where each car had been, where the gray one turned, where the black one had crashed. She wrote down every detail she could remember, afraid that time would blur the edges if she didn't trap them on paper. She realized then that the truth didn't disappear all at once. It faded slowly, worn down by doubt and comfort and the desire for easy answers. Emma folded the paper carefully and placed it under her pillow before going to sleep. If no one else was ready to fight for the truth yet, she would guard it herself. The hospital room was quiet except for the steady rhythm of machines, a sound that felt almost unreal to Daniel Hayes as he slowly regained his sense of time. The pain in his body had dulled into something manageable, but his mind refused to rest. Faces came and went, doctors, nurses, assistants, each one repeating the same careful phrases about recovery and luck. He listened politely, yet something inside him remained unsettled. He knew accidents happened. He had built his career understanding risk. But the memory of that night did not fit the word accident. There was a sharpness to it, a suddenness that felt deliberate. Every time he tried to recall the seconds before the crash, his thoughts stopped at the same place, right before the impact, as if his mind refused to fill in a lie for him. When the detective visited his room, Daniel asked a question that caught the man off guard. "Have you checked the cameras yet?" Daniel asked, his voice calm but firm. The detective hesitated for just a fraction of a second. "Not all of them," he admitted. "The initial review didn't show anything conclusive." Daniel nodded slowly. "I want a full review," he said. "Every camera. Public and private." The detective agreed, though his tone suggested the request would take time. That same evening, Emma sat at home with her notebook open in front of her. The pages were filled with careful drawings of the street, arrows showing directions, numbers written and rewritten until they felt exact. Her mother watched her from the kitchen, worry etched deep into her face. "You don't have to carry this alone," her mother said softly. Emma didn't look up. "If I stop thinking about it, I might forget something important," she replied. Her phone buzzed suddenly on the table, making her jump. Her mother answered it, listening quietly, then covered the receiver with her hand. "It's the hospital," she whispered. "They want to talk to you." Emma's heart began to pound as they drove there later that night. She sat in the passenger seat, clutching her notebook, her mind racing with every possible outcome. When they entered Daniel's room, she froze at the sight of him. He looked weaker than she remembered, his face pale, one arm bandaged, but his blue eyes were alert, watching her carefully. "You're the girl who called for help," Daniel said gently. Emma nodded, her voice stuck in her throat. I was told you saw something important, he continued. And I believe you. The words loosened something inside her. She stepped forward and opened her notebook, showing him the drawings, the notes, the careful details she had guarded for days. She told him everything again, slowly, clearly, pointing to the direction the gray car had taken and the moment it disappeared. Daniel listened without interrupting, his expression serious, his attention absolute. When she finished, he exhaled deeply. This wasn't an accident, he said quietly. Emma felt tears burn in her eyes, not from fear this time, but from relief. For the first time since the crash, an adult wasn't questioning her memory or softening her words. I knew it, she whispered. Daniel met her gaze. And now we make sure everyone else knows it too. As Emma left the hospital that night, she felt lighter, though the road ahead was still uncertain. The truth was no longer hers alone to protect. Someone powerful had finally chosen to listen. The investigation began to move with a different kind of energy after that meeting, quieter but far more focused. Daniel remained in the hospital for several more days, yet from his bed he made calls that carried more weight than any statement the police had released so far. Lawyers requested records. Technicians were hired to recover data that had been overlooked or dismissed as irrelevant. What had once been labeled an unfortunate accident was now being treated as a question that demanded a real answer. Emma returned to school, but she no longer felt invisible. She didn't talk about the crash unless asked, and even then she chose her words carefully, aware now of how easily truth could be reshaped by doubt. Her teachers noticed the change in her, the way she seemed older somehow, more attentive, as if part of her was always listening for something others could not hear. One afternoon, her mother picked her up earlier than usual. Emma noticed the tension in her shoulders, the way her fingers tightened around the steering wheel. They found something, her mother said quietly after a long pause. Emma's heart skipped. The cameras? Her mother nodded. Not the city ones. A private security camera from a warehouse down the street. It wasn't facing the road directly, but it caught enough. At the police station later that evening, Emma sat in a small room with beige walls while adults spoke in lowered voices nearby. She could hear fragments of conversation through the door. Matching vehicle description. Prior dispute. Evidence of intent. When they finally allowed her inside, the footage played on a small screen. The image was grainy, the angle imperfect, but the movement was unmistakable. A gray car accelerated, swerved deliberately, and clipped the black car with enough force to send it spinning. Then it sped away, headlights disappearing into the dark. Emma felt a strange mix of emotions rise inside her. Relief, fear, sadness. She hadn't wanted to be right. She had only wanted the truth to matter. This confirms it, one of the officers said. It wasn't an accident. They asked Emma a few more questions, this time with a different tone. No doubt. No gentle dismissal. Just careful attention. She answered calmly, her voice steady, though her hands trembled slightly in her lap. That night, Daniel was informed of the breakthrough. He closed his eyes when he heard the confirmation, not in triumph, but in quiet understanding. Someone had tried to end his life, and a child had stopped the lie from burying that fact. He asked for Emma's name again, committing it fully to memory this time. As the pieces came together, the person responsible was identified, a man with a history of resentment and a motive rooted in loss and anger. An arrest followed soon after, swift and controlled, without spectacle. Emma learned about it from her mother early the next morning. She sat on the edge of her bed, listening, feeling the weight of everything finally settle. So it's over? She asked. Her mother shook her head gently. It's ending, she said. Because you didn't stay quiet. Emma lay back and stared at the ceiling, breathing slowly. She understood now that speaking up didn't always feel heroic in the moment. Sometimes it felt lonely. Sometimes it felt frightening. But sometimes, it changed the ending. And that made every trembling word worth it. The days after the arrest felt strangely quiet, as if the city itself had exhaled and was waiting to see what would come next. News outlets finally changed their language. Accident became investigation. Investigation became attempted murder. Emma saw the words on screens in shop windows and on her mother's phone, and each time she felt a small jolt of disbelief that the truth had survived long enough to be named. At school, whispers followed her down the hallways. Someone's parent had talked. Someone had seen the report. A few classmates asked careful questions, others stared as if she were suddenly different. Emma didn't enjoy the attention. It made her uncomfortable, like wearing clothes that didn't fit. She answered politely when asked, then returned to her desk, focusing on her work, grounding herself in normal things like spelling words and math problems. Her teacher pulled her aside one afternoon and told her she was proud of her. Emma nodded, unsure what to do with praise that felt so heavy. Being right hadn't felt good. It had felt necessary. Daniel was released from the hospital that same week. He walked carefully now, his movements slower, his awareness sharper. The first thing he did was request a meeting with the police investigators, not to push, but to listen. He wanted to understand how close the case had come to being dismissed, how easily the truth could have been buried under convenience. The answers disturbed him more than the attempt on his life. After that, he asked to see Emma again. They met in a small, quiet room at the hospital, away from cameras and noise. Emma wore the same blue dress she had worn on the night of the crash, though now it felt like something from another lifetime. Daniel noticed immediately. "You kept it," he said gently. Emma nodded. "So I wouldn't forget." Daniel sat across from her, his posture careful, his voice sincere. "You gave me back more than my life," he said. "You reminded me how easily truth can disappear if no one protects it." Emma looked at him seriously. "I didn't want the wrong person to be blamed," she said. "That didn't feel fair." Daniel smiled, though there was sadness in it. "Fairness takes courage," he replied. "And you had it when others didn't." He didn't offer grand rewards or promises. Instead, he asked Emma what she wanted. The question caught her off guard. "I want people to listen when kids talk," she said after a moment. Daniel nodded slowly. "Then we'll start there." In the weeks that followed, he kept his word. His company funded a local program that trained adults in schools and community centers to take children's reports seriously, especially in emergencies. It wasn't announced with press releases. It simply began. Emma didn't fully understand the scale of it yet, but she felt something change around her. Adults asked her opinion more often. Her mother listened differently, with less fear and more trust. One evening, as Emma got ready for bed, she realized something important. The truth hadn't only changed the outcome of the accident. It had changed how people looked at her. And that meant it could change how they looked at others too. Time softened the sharp edges of what had happened, but it never erased them. Months passed, then a year, and the night of the crash settled into memory as something distant but important, like a line drawn quietly through Emma's life. She grew taller, her steps more confident, her voice steadier, though she still walked the same streets, still noticed the same details others overlooked. The intersection where the accident happened was repaired, the broken streetlight replaced, the marks on the asphalt faded away. To most people, it became just another crossing. To Emma, it remained a reminder of how quickly ordinary moments could turn into choices that mattered. Daniel Hayes returned fully to his work, but not to the man he had been before. He changed the way his company handled security, risk, and accountability, insisting on transparency even when it was uncomfortable. More than once, he spoke privately to colleagues about the importance of listening, not to the loudest voice in the room, but to the quietest one. Emma and her mother were invited to his office one afternoon, not as guests of honor, but as friends. There were no photographers, no speeches. Daniel thanked Emma again, simply and sincerely. "You trusted what you saw," he said. "That's rare." Emma smiled shyly. "It was hard," she admitted. "Hard things often are," Daniel replied. As they left, Emma paused by the large glass doors and looked back at the city stretching out beyond them. It felt bigger than it used to, not because it was more dangerous, but because she understood it better now. That evening, Emma sat at her desk and opened a new notebook. On the first page, she wrote slowly, carefully, making sure every letter was clear. "The truth matters. Even when it's quiet." She closed the notebook and placed it beside her bed. Outside, traffic moved steadily, people hurried home, and life continued, imperfect and uncertain. But Emma no longer felt powerless within it. She had learned that one voice, spoken at the right moment, could change everything. And she knew she would never stop listening to that voice again.